everyone, so welcome to chapter 13. In chapter 13 we're going to talk about meiosis. So meiosis is going to be kind of similar to mitosis, but also very distinctly different. So that's kind of one thing you want to be looking out for, is how is meiosis similar and what are some differences between meiosis and mitosis. Meiosis exclusively happens to create sperm and egg cells, so this is only going to form our gametes. And so we're also going to talk about sexual life cycles in this chapter. So offspring resemble their parents more than they do unrelated individuals. So you probably look more like your mom and dad than you look like me, because you and I are not related, but you and your parents are related. You probably look pretty similar to your siblings. When you are passing on your genes to your children, or when you have inherited traits from your parents, you don't actually inherit particular traits, you inherit genes, and genes control those traits. So I didn't give my children my hair. I gave my children my genes that controlled their hair. And these kids didn't inherit their parents' skin. They inherited their parents' genes, which control their skin. So heredity is a transmission of traits from one generation to the next. So from your grandparents to your parents to you to your children to your grandchildren, on as far back and as far forward as you can go. But there is also variation. So you see these three kids, they don't look all the same. There's also some variation in them. So siblings do have variation between each other, and the three kids don't look exactly like their mom or dad either. There's variation from their parents. And the reason we're going to see that is because of the way that meiosis makes different types of cells. So when we saw mitosis, it made exact copies. In meiosis, we're going to have 4 distinct cells that are not identical to each other. And then genetics is studying heredity and variation. Heredity and variation in genetics, this is what we're studying the rest of this semester. So this is kind of an important topic to me. So here is a sperm fertilizing an egg cell. So that sperm is carrying a copy of every chromosome from the dad, and that egg has a copy of each chromosome from the mom. So genes are the unit of heredity and are made of segments of DNA. Genes are passed to the next generation through reproductive cells called gametes. Our gametes are our sperm and our eggs. Most DNA is packaged into chromosomes. Humans have 46 chromosomes in our nuclei of our somatic cells. We have 23 pairs. So I have 2 copies of chromosome 1. One came from the sperm and one came from the egg that were fertilized. I have 23 copies of chromosome 2. I have 2 copies of chromosome 2, 2 copies of chromosome 3. So 23 chromosomes that each exist in pairs. Each of my somatic cells have that same 23 pairs. Each of your somatic cells, all of your cells except for your gametes and gamete precursors, so besides eggs, sperm, and like oocytes, precursors of gametes. And on your chromosomes are specific locations where genes are. Those specific locations, each location is called a locus. So a specific position of a gene is called a locus. So if I were to look at a chromosome, I would say this part is where it decides that I can digest lactose. This part is where it controls that I form freckles. This part is where it controls, how tall I am growing. Each gene has that specific location called a locus. If we're talking about more than one locus, it pluralizes to form loci, L-O-C-I. In asexual reproduction, a single individual passes all of its genes to its offspring without the fusion of gametes. So we talked about budding and binary fission in the last chapter. A clone is a group of genetically identical individuals from the same parent. So if you were to clone yourself, that clone would be genetically identical to you. We don't have the technology to clone people, but you could clone a carrot by cutting off the top of a carrot, replanting it, and a new carrot would grow. You could get it to root and just develop a carrot. That carrot would be a clone of the parent. And in sexual reproduction, 2 parents give rise to offspring that have unique combinations of genes inherited from the 2 parents. So if you remember talking, we've already seen this picture in the last chapter. A replicated chromosome has 2 chromatids, and both of these are identical. So this is one chromosome that has copied itself. It's still connected. It's got cohesins the whole way down. It's got a centromere where it's that tight waist where it's very tightly connected. A non-replicated chromosome has 1 chromatid. And then after DNA replication, you have sister chromatids. The centromere is here where the 2 chromatids are detached. Kinetochore is where the microtubules bind. So the microtubules will bind to the kinetochore. The arm is a part of the chromatids that extend past the centromere. So this is an arm, or sorry, well, I guess we look at this part. This is an arm, this is an arm, this is an arm, this is an arm. And then homologous chromosomes, or homologous pairs, are 2 chromosomes of the same number and size, but are not identical. So these are sister chromatids, but homologous chromosomes would be the chromosome 1 from my mom and the chromosome 2 I inherited from my dad. They're not identical. They don't have the exact same genes. My dad gave me slightly different genes than my mom gave me. So they have the same genes. They both gave me a gene for eye color. They both gave me a gene for hair texture, but they're not the exact same genes for eye color. My dad gave me a blue eye chromosome. My mom gave me a green eye chromosome. So those are homologous chromosomes where I have, both of them have eye color genes, but not the exact same nucleotide sequence, not the same base pairs in that DNA. All the cells in meiosis will start off with 2 copies of every chromosome, and these are called homologous chromosomes. So here is a replicated chromosome from mom and a replicated chromosome from dad. So this is a duplicated chromosome, this is a duplicated chromosome, and these are homologous chromosomes. They both have whatever this orange gene is here, whatever this orange gene is here, whatever this yellow gene is. They both have the same genes, but they're not the same. They might have a gene from mom that says I can digest lactose and a gene from dad that says I'm lactose intolerant, right? So they are homologous chromosomes. And each gene is found on a specific location called a locus. So this orange gene is found in the same place on both chromosomes. So we'll just say that this is the gene that says how your teeth develop, right? So you've got the same gene from your mom and the same gene from your dad. They're not necessarily the exact same type of gene. So they're both how your teeth develop, but one might say you start teething a little younger and one might say you start teething a little older, right? Human somatic cells have 23 pairs of chromosomes. So you should have chromosomes 1 through 22 plus your sex chromosomes. A karyotype is what this picture is called. A karyotype is an ordered display of all the chromosomes from a cell laid out. And different genes are going to bind to different dyes, and so you can see different colors on them. That helps you see if something is missing from one. And you have 2 chromosomes. So here's from your mom and from your dad. Those are homologous chromosomes. Chromosome 2 from your mom and dad, those are homologous chromosomes. Chromosome 3 from your mom and dad, those are homologous chromosomes. And you can see they go in order of size. So humans, we have numbered our chromosomes with number 1 being the biggest and number 22 being the smallest. And then X and Y are the sex chromosomes. So chromosomes in homologous pairs are the same length, the same shape, and they carry genes controlling the same inherited characters. Although you could have different genes from your mom and dad, what each individual gene controls is going to be at the same place. Hope that makes sense. So whether you grow tall or short, the genes that control your kind of genetic predisposition to height are going to be at the same place. And the genes that control your ability to form freckles, your ability to form a widow's peak or have a straight hairline, that's all going to be, even though your mom and dad could have given you differences in those genes, their same basic gene is going to be at the same place. And then the sex chromosomes are called X and Y. So here there's an X and Y. If you're, for the most part, there are some differences that we'll talk about later, but in general, XX, if you have 2 X chromosomes, that makes you a female. And if you're a male, you have X and Y. So this person is XY. So this person is genetically a male. So those are your sex chromosomes. All the rest of your chromosomes, chromosomes 1 through 22, are called autosomes. So if you are talking about autosomes, you are talking about all of these that don't decide your genetic sexual identity, gender identity. I don't know which word is right there. And then X and Y, or XX, those are your sex chromosomes. Okay, each pair of homologous chromosomes includes one pair from each parent. The 46 chromosomes in a human somatic cell are two sets of 23, one from the mother and one from the father. So if you counted these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you count up to, you would have 46. But you have one pair of each. You have 23 chromosomes from mom, 23 chromosomes from dad. Although your karyotype isn't arranged as this is from mom, this is from dad, it just shows these are your two chromosomes, one. A diploid cell has two sets of chromosomes. So here you see this cell is diploid because I have two copies of chromosome 1, two copies of chromosome 2. If this were a haploid cell, I would only have one copy of each. So instead of having two of this copy 1, I'd only have one. And that would be a gamete cell, which would be a sperm or egg. So a diploid cell has two sets of chromosomes. A haploid cell has one set. So diploid cells are often written as 2N. For humans, the diploid number is 46 because 2N equals 46, right? So we have 23 chromosomes, N is 23, but 2N is 46 because we have two of each chromosome. In a cell in which DNA synthesis has occurred, your DNA is replicated, each chromosome is copied. So that's when you have sister chromosomes. So this is a cell that has undergone S phase but has not yet undergone mitosis. It has two copies of each chromosome. So each replicated chromosome is going to consist of two identical sister chromatids. A gamete, which is a sperm or egg, has a single set of chromosomes, and so it's haploid, so they are N. So when you go through meiosis, your haploid cells are developed, your egg and sperm cells. For humans, the haploid number is 23, N equals 23. So each sperm and each egg has 23 chromosomes. You have 22 autosomes, chromosomes 1 through 22, and one sex chromosome. And an unfertilized egg or an ovum, the sex chromosome is always X. So mothers have two X chromosomes, so mothers always make eggs that have X chromosomes in them. And in sperm cells, the sex chromosome could be X or Y. So if the sperm cell has X and it fuses, then that diploid zygote would have two X chromosomes. And if that sperm cell has a Y chromosome, then when these cells fuse, it'll have an X from the mom and a Y from the dad. So that diploid zygote would have an X and Y chromosome. That is the general case of what happens. We will, again, there are sometimes things that can happen that not all cells are going to be XX or XY. There's some other things that can happen that are kind of interesting, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Fertilization is the union of gametes, or sperm and egg, joining together to make one diploid zygote. So that sperm is going to bust into the egg, and they're going to just fuse into one fertilized egg. This fertilized egg is called a zygote, and a zygote has one set of chromosomes from each parent. So that zygote is now a 2N. So meiosis gives you egg and sperm, which only have one copy of each chromosome. Egg and sperm fuse to give you a diploid cell that has two copies of each chromosome. And that diploid cell can reproduce by mitosis to produce all the somatic cells, all the adult cells, and then meiosis allows those adults to have egg and sperm. At sexual maturity, ovaries and testes produce haploid gametes, and gametes are the only types of cells produced by meiosis. So when we're talking about meiosis, we are only talking about how we're forming eggs and sperm. Meiosis is going to result in one set of chromosomes in each gamete. Instead of a diploid, they're going to be haploid, one set of each chromosome. Fertilization and meiosis will alternate in sexual life cycles to maintain chromosome number. So meiosis always gives you gametes that are haploid. Fertilization always gives you zygotes that are diploid. That leads to diploid humans. That leads to meiosis that have sperm and egg cells. So this is always how it goes. So it just keeps cycling. A life cycle is the generation to generation sequence of stages in the reproductive history of an organism. So this is a life cycle. Alternation of meiosis and fertilization is common to all organisms that reproduce sexually, although there are three different types of sexual life cycles. So in animals, we have meiosis, gives rise to gametes. Gametes fertilize to give you zygotes, which gives you a diploid organism, which then goes back. So the only things that are haploid are those gametes. There's also what is called, where is it labeled? Oh, I don't have it labeled yet. Okay, there's also two other types of sexual life cycles. So there's diploid dominant, which is what we are. There's haploid dominant, and there's alternation of generations. So haploid dominant would be some fungi and protists, and alternation of generations is what we see in plants and some algae. And these are going to differ in the timing of meiosis and fertilization. We'll talk about this more if you take 1120. We're not going to get into those a lot right now, but just to briefly go through them. A diploid dominant life cycle is what we see in animals. Gametes are the only haploid cells, so sperm and eggs are haploid, but multicellular diploid stage is the most obvious life cycle. Humans and most animals do this. An alternation of generations, this is what we see in plants and some animals. The life cycle includes both a diploid and a haploid stage. So your haploid can create spores that can actually give rise to multicellular plants and multicellular organisms. Then they can go through fertilization. A gamete from this haploid organism and another gamete can go through fertilization to create a diploid organism that can create an actual multicellular plant. Then meiosis creates spores that can create another, so you have this alternation of some plants are haploid and some of those plants are diploid. In this, a spore grows by mitosis into a haploid organism called a gametophyte, and the gametophyte makes haploid gametes by mitosis, and fertilization of gametes results in a diploid sporophyte again. So we're not actually going to talk about this too much because I don't think it's really relevant to the chapter, but we kind of touched on what this alternation of generations is. Then in haploid dominant, this is what we see in most fungi and some protists. The only diploid stage is a single-celled zygote. There's no multicellular diploid stage. So multicellular haploid stage is the most obvious life cycle. This single-celled zygote, it creates a single-celled zygote that is diploid that immediately goes into meiosis, and the meiosis, that meiotic cell reproduces by mitosis to give you haploid cells. Those cells can fuse in fertilization to give you a diploid zygote that immediately goes back into meiosis. So the single-celled zygote is the only diploid cells. The organisms exist. The organisms exist mainly in this haploid life cycle. So the haploid dominant means most of the organisms are haploid. Depending on the type of life cycle, either haploid or diploid cells can divide by mitosis, but only diploid cells ever undergo meiosis. And in all three life cycles, the halving and doubling of chromosomes contributes to genetic variation in offspring. So this is really important. This process of meiosis is what gives us genetic variation amongst different humans. Okay, so this is the end of part 1. I will see you back for chapter 13, part 2. Shortly, I'll see you later. Bye. Oh, and let me know if you have any questions. Email or message through D2L. Bye.